This is the part where I usually say this takes me to my favorite tracks. I don't really know what to do with this thing, man. I enjoyed all of it. I really did. What's happening, everybody? It's Sean with Reactions to the Classics, and today we got a covers versus originals top 10 brought to us by a friend, longtime supporter, and patron of the channel, Slade Said. Thank you, Slade Said. Appreciate everything you bring. Appreciate all the patrons. If you'd like to support us in any way, we greatly appreciate it. Check out the Patreon link below or the Patreon link on the end screen. Lots of things we can do for you. Any bit of support, you can go for as little as $1 a month. Greatly helps us out, man. I'm telling you, we put out videos every single day. It takes a lot of man hours, so thank you for your consideration. Okay, I think this is a great idea for a list. And Slade Said knows a ton about music, and he kind of went outside the box a little bit with some older stuff. He said, I went for covers which are vastly different than the original, and where the covering artist, to some extent, makes the song their own. 3 of the originals are very, all caps, old, and they are. And so there is a major difference in sound between the original and the cover version. While for the other 2, the stylistic change is lesser, but still absolutely sounds more like a song written by the cover artist than just a song they covered without adding any, quote, personality to it. The songs are not ranked based on quality, but in chronological order based on the original recording. So I think what I'm going to do on this, I usually pick my favorite tracks, and I still might do that, but I'm going to pick a winner between the 2. And I only know a couple of these originals, right? So let's see. I mean, I went over this last night. I only know 2 of these originals, yeah. So, and I don't know them greatly. So if you haven't been with us before, the music will not be in the video, but it'll be the Vimeo link below. Go check that out. Thanks again, Slade Said. All right, first up, the song, See That My Grave Is Kept Clean from 1928. The original version, Blind Lemon Jefferson. And Slade Said included some great research on all of these. He said, Lemon Henry Jefferson was an American blues and gospel singer-songwriter who was one of the most popular blues singers of the 1920s and has been called the father of the Texas blues. I live in Texas. He was born blind near Couchman, Texas, and due to his blindness, he was known as Blind Lemon Jefferson. He became one of the first artists to record solo voice and blues guitar, firstly using a stage name Deacon L.J. Bates for his first 2 recorded songs, before mostly going with Blind Lemon Jefferson thereafter. I mean, Blind Lemon Jefferson, you don't need anything but that, right? His playing style was clearly founded in traditional blues, but he was definitely not confined to that. It was pretty original for the time. The song for this list, See That My Grave Is Kept Clean, is one of his classics, originally recorded as Deacon L.J. Bates in 1927, and later re-recorded in 1928 using his Blind Lemon Jefferson name. I don't have anything to add really to the research, but I looked at a lot of stuff last night when I was going over this list and putting Slade Said stuff together. These guys, these older blues guys, they all have great stories. Like I dug into the wikis for Blind Lemon Jefferson. We got a guy coming up that I will tell you a little extra on that's got a crazy story, but I'm going to have the lyrics up as always. Let's get after it. Blind Lemon Jefferson, See That My Grave's Kept Clean. I mean, it's so cool that we have something from 1928 as I filmed this at the end of 2022. It's just insane that something like that has survived. And a well-written song, right? The way they did it back in the day so much. It's 4-line verses. It's kind of traditional, but it's also basically the first 2 lines are exactly the same, and the 3rd line kind of changes it a little bit sometimes, and sometimes the first 3 lines are the same. But he's got one favor he'll ask of you, Lord. It's one kind favor I'll ask of you. See that my grave is kept clean. Then he's talking about it's a long way and ain't got no wind, and it's a bad wind that never changed. So he's going to be there forever, right? Or it's 2 white horses in a line. Going to take me to my burying ground. My heart stopped beating and my hands got cold. It wasn't long before they took me to the cypress grove, right to the cemetery, man. If you ever heard a coffin sound, then you know the poor boy is in the ground. Or dig my grave with a silver spade. You may lead me down with a golden chain. And then the last verse, there's 7 verses. Have you ever heard a church bell's tone? Then you know that the poor boy's dead and gone. Just keep that grave clean. Ironically and sadly, Blind Lemon Jefferson, I keep wanting to call him Blind Willie because of Blind Willie McTell. Blind Lemon Jefferson died a year later from complications of pneumonia at only the age of 36. So that's cool, right? To listen to something that old and to see what somebody else does with it, because the next track, next up, we got an artist that has been on top 10s before from Slade Said. We got the Dream Syndicate. And Slade Said Paisley Underground Leaders, the Dream Syndicate, recorded a cover version of the song for their 1988 album Ghost Stories, which would be their last album before they broke up and reunited almost 30 years later. The lineup was Steve Wynn on guitars and lead vocals, Paul B. Cutler on lead guitar, Dennis Duck on drums, and Mark Walton on bass. The version of the song totally sounds like an original Dream Syndicate song. See That My Grave Is Kept Clean totally sounds like a Dream Syndicate song, a few things I've heard from them. And, they just modernized the lyrics a little bit. I'm not going to really go into that. It doesn't really matter. But they have one line, now I believe what the Bible told. Obviously, the guitar work on here is fantastic. The vocal performance is fantastic. I figured out, I told you I was going to pick a winner between each song. That's really not a good idea, right? This is kind of a fluid thing. We figure out as we go. Maybe I'll pick favorite songs because these two songs are so different. I can't sit here and knock blind Lemon Jefferson because he's playing the guitar by himself and singing, which he did a fantastic job of playing the guitar along with the song, and then compare it to the Dream Syndicate who's in here. They're great musicians, right? And the arrangement's fantastic. And so that's not really a fair comparison. But that's a really cool song, man. I'd never heard it before. Now we'll go on to our second pairing of songs. We got Vigilante Man from 1940, original version by Woody Guthrie. Slade said Woody Guthrie was an American singer-songwriter from Okemah, Oklahoma, and arguably the most significant artist in American folk music during the first half of the 20th century. His songs have been covered by a lot of different artists, amongst others Harry Belafonte, Johnny Cash, Pete Seeger, Glenn Campbell, Bob Dylan, Bruce Springsteen, Alison Krauss, The Byrds, John Mellencamp, Van Morrison, The Waterboys, Wilco, and many others. His most famous song is probably This Land Is Our Land. His first recorded album was 1940's Dust Bowl Ballads, which includes some of his better known songs, including the one I chose for this list, Vigilante Man. And, Woody Guthrie's got an interesting story. People accuse him of being communist, really sidetracked his career. He was a guy that kind of spoke up against American elitism. That didn't make him a communist by any means. All right, let's check it out. All right, Vigilante Man. Let's give a little context. This is 1940, so, it's been a minute, right? 80 plus years. So a little bit of background. Say in the early 20th century United States, the term vigilante was used to describe railroad bosses that threw hobos off of trains, hired thugs used to crush labor movements, and or folks who would forcibly chase off Western migrants. Reference in verse 5, preacher John Casey is a prominent character in John Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath. I did not know that. So, which tells, of course, the hardships of the Depression era and the Dust Bowl. So, yeah, he's just asking about, have you seen the Vigilante Man? I've been hearing his name all over the land. This guy around him may want to get out of here. And then in verse 2, I thought he was going to answer it for me. He said, well, what is a Vigilante Man? Tell me, what is a Vigilante Man? Has he got a gun and a club in his hand? Is that a Vigilante Man? I don't know, Woody. I wanted you to tell me. And then he just kind of talks about rainy night down in the engine house, sleeping just as still as a mouse. Man come along as he chased us out in the rain. Was that a Vigilante Man? So they're taking up shelter somewhere, not bothering anybody. So he just kind of goes along and talks about, all the different ways that could be a Vigilante Man. Oh, why does a Vigilante Man carry that sawed-off shotgun in his hand? Would he shoot his brother and sister down? I rambled from town to town. They herded us around like a herd of cattle. Was that the Vigilante Man? So, yeah, an interesting song for 1940, right? I'm sure it hit pretty good. Now, got Nazareth and their cover version. So they said Scottish hard rock band Nazareth's biggest hit was Love Hurts, a cover version by the song first recorded by the Everly Brothers, which I did not know. I always learn something from Slade Said stuff. I always learn a lot of stuff, but I did not know that. I did not come across that for some reason when I did a Nazareth top 10, although I'm not going to tell you if Love Hurts is on there or not, but it's up on the channel. Nazareth have always mixed their albums with originals and interesting cover songs, and there are a number of songs by the band that I could have chosen for this list, but I believe the version of Vigilante Man is a great example of the band showing how they could really turn a folk song into a Nazareth song, with Dan McCafferty, may he rest in peace, showing all of his skills. The song was included on the band's 1973 album, which I know that Sean loves to pronounce. Guys, we know I love to pronounce a lot of things. And I practiced this, Slade said, when I came across this list, I got this when I filmed this. But now, it's a trick. Razamanes. And I'm not going to say it again. All right, let's check it out. Vigilante Man, Nazareth. I really liked what they did with this, right? Because I kept waiting for the instrumentation to kick up, and it never really did. It did a little bit. Vocally, he kicked it in, right? But he kicked it in towards the end. But more the emotion of how the song was building, like the kind of anxiousness in there. Have you seen the Vigilante Man? And, we got a little guitar work kicking up in there, but I thought they handled this song very well. I thought it stays close to the original and just modernizes it a little bit. You could still feel the emotion. They really didn't change up the lyrics. They did a little bit. They just kind of blended a few of the verses together. It has all the same meaning. So I really like what they did with that. All right, song number 3, Where Did You Sleep Last Night from 1944. Original version by Lead Belly. And that's where I went down a rabbit hole of research last night. Slade said the song Where Did You Sleep Last Night is probably the oldest song on this list since it's actually a refined version of a traditional which dates back to at least the 1870s. The quote original version is really 2 songs which follow the same melody but have different lyrics. The Longest Train and In the Pines. The latter of which is actually the title that Lead Belly used. He also recorded another version of the song with the title Black Girl, but the lyrics were pretty much the same as In the Pines. Lead Belly, whose Christian name was Huddy Ledbetter, was a blues folk artist from the outskirts of Los Angeles who was known as, quote, the king of the 12-string guitar. He had a difficult life and went in and out of prison a lot, but his musical influence is not to be dismissed. Kurt Cobain listed Lead Belly's Last Session Volume 1 as one of the 50 most influential albums in the formation of Nirvana's sound, and Bob Dylan has stated that listening to Lead Belly's Cotton Fields changed his life and, quote, transported me into a world I'd never known, like I'd been walking in darkness and all of a sudden the darkness was illuminated. I mean, that's high praise from Mr. Zimmerman. George Harrison has said that without Lead Belly, the Beatles probably wouldn't have existed, and Ronnie Wood of the Rolling Stones has claimed that the British popular music scene in the 1960s wouldn't have happened if not for Lead Belly's influence. Now, if you search Lead Belly, like this guy was in and out of prison numerous times. First time for carrying a gun, then for killing a relative, then for various stabbings and fights. In jail, he got stabbed. That guy tried to kill him. Guy stabbed him in his neck, so he had to wear a bandana for the rest of his life because he had a scarlet. Just a crazy, interesting life. And the record company people that helped him, and then he kind of sued him and got out from the it's a crazy story. And I learned, though, that him and some of these other guys actually really kicked up the blues movement like 20 miles this way from me, down in Deep Ellum, which is part of Dallas, Texas. I did not know that, but I probably read about Lead Belly for an hour last night just after I read this little part. I'm like, all right, and it just kind of takes you down that rabbit hole. So let's check it out. Lead Belly, Where Did You Sleep Last Night? I know he didn't write this, but if this man was singing this to me and I was his significant other, I'd be very frightened considering his history with the legal system. So he's just asking her, my girl, don't lie to me. Tell me, where'd you sleep last night? Come on and tell me, baby. In the pines where the sun don't ever shine? I would shiver the whole night through. He's like, I'm sure you were just sleeping out there outside, right? You weren't sleeping anywhere. My girl, where will you go? I'm going where the cold wind blows. Where's that, baby? In the pines? So he's asking her, like, and he just keeps on going through that. But then in verse 4, there's 5 verses. Her husband was a hardworking man, killed 1.5 miles from here. What happened to him? His head was found in a driving wheel, which I read is a locomotive wheel, and his body's never been found. And then he just finishes with the same verse. My girl, don't you lie to me. Tell me where you sleep last night in the pines where the sun would never shine. I would shiver the whole night through. So just a nice haunting. Like it was you could tell he kind of had sort of an upbeat, maybe a smile on his face when he was singing it, but it's a very menacing song. Now we're going to look at the cover version of it. You see it below. The great Mark Lanigan, who we just lost in February of this year. Slade said, Where did you sleep last night? It's probably mostly made famous by Nirvana, who covered it at their MTV Unplugged session. Okay. However, that version actually wasn't the first recorded cover of the song that Kurt Cobain was involved in, since a couple of years before he'd recorded with Mark Lanigan with the intention of recording an album full of covers. It never materialized, but the cover version of the song was used for Mark Lanigan's solo debut album from 1990. And I personally think this version is superior to Nirvana's version. All right, man, let's go. Where did you sleep last night? Mark Lanigan with 2/3 of Nirvana on here too, because Cobain's doing the electric and obviously the backing vocals, and Chris Novoselic is on the bass, and then the drummer's Mark Pickerel, who is a drummer with in Screaming Trees with the Lanigan. So you got a nice group put together there. And Mark just rearranged the song. It's got all the same stuff on it. He just wanted to go out with the same verses in the last, I think, 3. Yeah, with the last 3, the verse and the refrains. I liked it so much. I like the arrangement of it. Obviously, the guitar work, and they gave it more of, I want to say, a menacing sound to it, sort of that build and that emotion. So you kind of felt like something's about to go down. So, I mean, that was super well done. Now we'll go to our song number 4, Hang On to Your Ego from 1966, the original version, of course, by the Beach Boys. Slade said the Beach Boys obviously need no introduction, so I'll just say that Hang On to Your Ego was included on their magnum opus Pet Sounds from 1966, where it had the title, I Know There's an Answer, because Mike Love didn't like the Hang On to Your Ego line since it was a reference to LSD, which he did not want to advocate on later editions of Pet Sounds, Hang On to Your Ego has been included as an extra track. So that's where we're listening to that extra track. I got a story on that, and we've got a Pet Sounds review up when we're doing the old school reviews with a lot of information on Pet Sounds. And I'll leave my opinion of Mike Love out of it, but it's not great. All right, let's do it. Hang On to Your Ego. So talking about what psychedelic drugs do to your brain takes on a bigger meaning considering what they did to Brian Wilson's dream, who of course is the mastermind behind this album. All the interesting sounds from Pet Sounds is all here. So that was good. Now I'm really curious to see what this next artist does with it. We got Frank Black. Who is that? I had no idea. But Slade said, after Pixies dissolved, band leader Black Francis changed his stage name to Frank Black. It's pretty clever, actually, and pursued a solo career. His first solo album was released in 1993 as a very good solo debut, which included a cover version of Hang On to Your Ego. And I found the album was supposed to be a covers album, but when he came to the studio to record it, he had already composed a number of other tracks. So he ended up only keeping this one cover. So that's why this one cover is on here. All right, let's check it out. Hang On to Your Ego, Frank Black, Black Francis, whatever you want to call him. I thought the arrangement of that was fantastic. I thought it fit the song perfectly. He sounded great. So yeah, man, I thought that was well done. I actually prefer that version. I haven't been saying what I preferred. I actually prefer that version to the Beach Boys, but I know that's sacrilege because Pet Sounds is the magnum opus and all that good stuff. But yeah, that was good. All right, we're up to our fifth and final song. A song I've never known how to pronounce, Astronomy Domine from 1967. Original version, of course, from Pink Floyd, from Piper at the Gates of Dawn, which we've got a full album review up of. So let's hit for our final song. We have another artist who needs no grand introduction, so I'll just cut it short and say that this song was the lead off track on the band's first album, which I talked about, the Pipers at the Gates of Dawn from 1967. It was written by Syd Barrett, who, of course, was the band's main songwriter in the very early years. Ironically enough, the last one that we did was off Pet Sounds, and Brian Wilson and Syd Barrett had similar outcomes from using psychedelic drugs, although Syd's was, I guess, a little more severe. But yeah, all right, man. I've only heard the song when we were doing the review, which we listened to the album back then several times when we were doing the review. But I mean, I wouldn't remember it off the top of my head. All right, I think the beauty in this song is just, to be the first single on your first album, just to let people know, hey, I've arrived, the almost space rock psychedelic thing. Here it is. And the song's lyricism, it's about a planet. It's about a few different things. One of the verses in the first verse, a couple of the lines are probably about feeling bad, feeling blue, but, highly open to interpretation, of course. And the intro is this mixed up sound, sounding like a NASA, space conversation between ground control and a ship, because in 1967, it was all about the race to the moon, right? I wasn't quite alive yet, but it was all about that. So that's how they brought you in. So you're like, oh man, this is going to be different. In that verse 1, a fight between the blue you once knew, floating down, the sound resounds. So that's kind of what I'm talking about, but a very spacey thing. Verse 2, Stairway Scare, Dan Dare, who's there? Dan Dare's a British science fiction comic hero, and is referenced in the song with obvious references to space planets and their moons, because I'm like, who is Dan Dare? So obviously the instrumentation and guitar work is really good. So I'm going to be quite interested to see how Voivod, I think that's how you say it, Voivod, tackled this one. This is from their Nothing Face album, which is their 5th studio album, and it's their most successful album to date. They're only one to enter the Billboard Top 200 charts, where it peaked at number 114. A music video made for this song received airplay on MTV's Headbangers Ball. That's a blast from the past. This album's very well acclaimed. Rock Hard Magazine, Loudwire, Kerrang! Described the album as a prog thrash masterpiece. So I had to go a little deeper on them because I never heard them. Slade said, to some, doing cover versions of bands like the Beatles, Beach Boys, and Pink Floyd are borderline heresy. But I always felt it's a good way to keep younger audiences aware of the great songs and artists of the past. Canada's progressive thrash metal band Voivod have always been huge fans of Floyd and have recorded 2 cover songs by the band. Most famous cover version is here off that 1989 album, Nothing Face. So I got to tell you, with covers, I kind of feel the same way, but I see Slade said's point there a little bit, especially with Beatles covers. Man, that's a tough one for me, but I mean, I see his point, man. You get younger people into hearing the music they might never hear otherwise. Voivod and their cover of Astronomy Domine from Pink Floyd. While it was different, I thought they really tried to keep the same Floyd vibe, right? I mean, there's a lot more drumming in this than Floyd had, and not so much the spacey guitar, but it was still in there. The guitar work was fantastic. But I thought dreamy type lyrical delivery to try to keep you in that. They didn't have the NASA stuff or the simulated NASA stuff in there, but they had a nice build to it. So I thought while it was different, they did a good job of respecting the Floyd sound. So this is the part where I usually say this takes me to my favorite tracks. You know, I don't really know what to do with this thing, man. I enjoyed all of it. I really did. You know, it's a very smart and clever way of going about doing things that Slade said came up with. And I think he came up with great differentiation, especially with these older tracks, you know, and then coming with somebody who's covering it in a newer way. So, I mean, I always pick favorites. I guess I'll pick two of these that are my favorites. But then, of course, I don't know what to pick. I'm going to go with Where Did You Sleep Last Night, Lead Belly, and then, of course, Mark Lanigan with most of the boys with Nirvana there. And I'll go with that first track, See That My Grave Is Kept Clean, Blind Lemon Jefferson, and the Dream Syndicate. But, I mean, you could talk me into any of these, quite honestly. So let me know what your favorite is here. Give me some other covers versus originals. Outside the box a little bit, not, you know, like Beatles stuff, but outside the box a little bit that I should check out. So thanks again to Slade Said. Until next time, guys, I will see you.